The Quran and scientific falsification tests.
A truly scientific approach to the Quran is possible because the Quran offers something that is not offered by other religious scriptures in particular and other religions in general. It is what scientists demand. Today there are many people who have ideas and theories about how the universe works. These people are all over the place, but the scientific community does not even bother to listen to them. This is because within the last century the scientific community has demanded a test of falsification. They say, if you have theory, do not bother us with it unless you bring with that theory a way for us to prove whether you are wrong or not. Such a test was exactly why the scientific community listened to Einstein towards the beginning of the century. He came with a new theory and said, I believe the universe works like this, and here are 3 ways to prove whether I am wrong. So the scientific community subjected his theory to the tests, and within 6 years it passed all 3. Of course, this does not prove that he was great, but it proves that he deserved to be listened to because he said, this is my idea, and if you want to try to prove me wrong, do this or try that. This is exactly what the Quran has. Falsification tests. Some are old in that they have already been proven true, and some still exist today. Basically, it states, if this book is not what it claims to be, then all you have to do is this, or this, or this to prove that it is false. Of course, in 1400 years, no one has been able to do this, or this, or this, and thus it is still considered true and authentic. I suggest to you that the next time you get into a dispute with someone about Islam and he claims that he has the truth and that you are in darkness, you leave all other arguments at first and make this suggestion. Ask him, is there any falsification test in your religion? Is there anything in your religion that would prove you are wrong if I could prove to you that it exists? Anything? Well, I can promise right now that people will not have anything. No test, no proof, nothing. This is because they do not carry around the idea that they should not only present what they believe, but should also offer others a chance to prove they're wrong. However, Islam does that. A perfect example of how Islam provides man with a chance to verify its authenticity and prove it wrong occurs in the 4th chapter. It states, do they not consider the Quran? Had it been from any other than Allah, they would surely have found therein much discrepancy. This is a clear challenge to the non-Muslim. Basically, it invites him to find a mistake. As a matter of fact, the seriousness and difficulty of the challenge aside, the actual presentation of such a challenge in the first place is not even in human nature and is inconsistent with man's personality. One doesn't take an exam in school after finishing the exam, write a note to the instructor at the end saying, this exam is perfect. There are no mistakes in it. Find one if you can. One just doesn't do that. The teacher would not sleep until he found a mistake. And yet this is the way the Quran approaches people. Another interesting attitude that exists in the Quran repeatedly deals with its advice to the reader. The Quran informs the reader about different facts and then gives the advice. If you want to know more about this or that, or if you doubt what is said, then you should ask those who have knowledge. This too is a surprising attitude. It is not usual to have a book that comes from someone without training in geography, botany, biology, etc., who discusses these subjects and then advises the reader to ask men of knowledge if he doubts anything. Yet in every age, there have been Muslims who have followed the advice of the Quran and made surprising discoveries. If one looks to the works of Muslim scientists from many centuries ago, one will find them full of quotations from the Quran. These works state that they did research in such a place, looking for something, and they affirm that the reason they looked in such and such a place was that the Quran pointed them in that direction. For example, the Quran mentions man's origin and then tells the reader, research it. It gives the reader a hint where to look and then states that one should find out more about it. This is the kind of thing that Muslims today largely seem to overlook, but not always, as illustrated in the following example. Not long ago, a group in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, collected all of the verses in the Quran which discuss embryology, the growth of the human being in the womb. They said, here is what the Quran says. Is it the truth? In essence, they took the advice of the Quran. Ask the men who know. They chose, as it happened, a non-Muslim professor of embryology, an author of textbooks on embryology, a world expert on the subject. They invited him to Riyadh and said, "This is what the Quran says about your subject. Is it true? What can you tell us?" While the professor was in Riyadh, they gave him all of the help that he needed in translation and all of the cooperation for which he asked. And he was so surprised at what he found that he changed his textbooks. In fact, in the second edition of his book about the history of embryology, he included some material that was not in the first edition because of what he found in the Quran. Truly, this illustrates that the Quran was ahead of its time, and that those who believe in the Quran know what other people do not know. He mentioned that some of the things that the Quran states about the growth of the human being were not known until this century. In fact, one item in particular, the Quran's description of the human being as a leech-like clot, alaka, at one stage, was new to him. But when he checked on it, he found that it was true, and so he added it to his book. He said, "I never thought of that before," and he went to the zoology department and asked for a picture of a leech. When he found that it looked just like the human embryo, he decided to include both pictures in one of his textbooks. His book on clinical embryology caused quite a stir. It was on the front pages of some of the newspapers, and some of the headlines were quite funny. For instance, one headline read, "Surprising thing found in ancient book." It seems obvious from this example that people do not clearly understand what it is all about. As a matter of fact, one newspaper reporter asked the professor, "Don't you think that maybe the Arabs might have known about these things? The description of the embryo, its appearance, and how it changes and grows? Maybe they were not scientists, but maybe they did some crude dissections on their own, carved up people and examined these things." The professor immediately pointed out to him that he, i.e. the reporter, had missed a very important point. All of the slides of the embryo that had been shown and had been projected in the film had come from pictures taken through a microscope. He said, "It does not matter if someone had tried to discover embryology 14 centuries ago, they could not have seen it. All of the descriptions in the Quran of the appearance of the embryo are of the item when it is still too small to see with the eye. Therefore, one needs a microscope to see it." Since such a device had only been around for little more than 200 years, Dr. taunted, maybe 14 centuries ago someone secretly had a microscope and did this research, making no mistakes anywhere. Then he somehow taught Muhammad, peace be on him, and convinced him to put this information in his book. Then he destroyed his equipment and kept it a secret forever. Do you believe that? You really should not unless you bring some proof, because it is such a ridiculous theory. In fact, when he was asked, "How do you explain this information in the Quran?" Professor's reply was, "It could only have been divinely revealed." Although the aforementioned example of man researching information contained in the Quran deals with a non-Muslim, it is still valid because he is one of those who is knowledgeable in the subject being researched. Had some layman claimed that what the Quran says about embryology is true, then one would not necessarily have to accept his word. However, because of the high position, respect and esteem man gives scholars, one naturally assumes that if they research a subject and arrive at a conclusion based on that research, then the conclusion is valid.